Plato, the philosopher who invented philosophy, the birth of Western thought. In the Golden Age of Athens, around 428 BC, a child was born into an aristocratic family who would transform human thought more profoundly than perhaps any other individual in history. His birth name was Aristocles, but he would become known to posterity as Plato, possibly a nickname referring to his broad physique or broad forehead, from the Greek word Platos meaning broad. This man would not merely contribute to philosophy. In many ways, he would invent philosophy as we know it, establishing the questions, methods, and frameworks that would occupy Western thinkers for the next 2.5 millennia. Plato was born into a time of extraordinary intellectual ferment and political turmoil. Athens, the cultural and political heart of ancient Greece, had reached the zenith of its power and cultural achievement under Pericles. The Parthenon gleamed newly built on the Acropolis. Tragedians like Sophocles and Euripides staged their profound explorations of human nature and divine justice. Democracy, that revolutionary experiment in collective self-governance, flourished in the assembly where citizens debated the great questions of war, peace, and justice. But this golden age was already fading as Plato entered the world. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta had begun 2 years before his birth and would rage for another 27 years, ultimately destroying Athenian power and confidence. Plato grew up in a city at war, watching the democratic institutions he would later critique with such penetrating insight, make decisions that led to defeat, occupation, and civil strife. This context of political crisis and intellectual vitality would shape everything he wrote. Plato's family connections placed him at the very center of Athenian society. His father, Aristotle, claimed descent from Codrus, the last king of Athens. His mother, Pryxian, was related to Solon, the great lawgiver who had laid the foundations of Athenian democracy 2 centuries earlier. Through his mother's remarriage after his father's death, Plato became connected to Critias and Charmides, who would later become 2 of the 30 tyrants, the brutal oligarchic regime that briefly ruled Athens after its defeat by Sparta. These family connections to both democratic reformers and oligarchic tyrants gave Plato intimate knowledge of political extremes, and perhaps a skepticism about both democracy and tyranny. The transformative encounter, meeting Socrates. The pivotal event of Plato's life occurred when he was about 20 years old and encountered Socrates, the enigmatic philosopher who wandered the streets and marketplaces of Athens, engaging anyone who would listen in philosophical dialogue. Socrates was unlike anyone Athens had seen. He wrote nothing, claimed to know nothing, yet through his relentless questioning exposed the ignorance of those who claimed expertise. He was ugly by conventional standards, snub-nosed, with bulging eyes and a pot belly, yet he possessed a charisma and intellectual power that drew the brightest young men of Athens to him like moths to a flame. For Plato, meeting Socrates was a conversion experience. He had been planning a career in politics, as befitted his aristocratic background. He may have written poetry and tragedy, as later sources suggest. But Socrates showed him something more profound than political power or artistic achievement. The possibility of living an examined life, of pursuing truth through rigorous questioning, of caring more for the soul's improvement than for wealth or reputation. Plato became one of Socrates' most devoted followers, spending the next 8 or 9 years in his company, absorbing his method of questioning, his moral seriousness, and his conviction that virtue is knowledge. He watched as Socrates questioned generals about courage, poets about beauty, politicians about justice, and religious experts about piety, in each case revealing that these supposed experts couldn't coherently define or defend their most basic concepts. He learned the Socratic method, asked for a definition, examined it through questions, reveals inadequacies, and begin again, always pushing toward greater clarity and truth. The death of Socrates. Philosophy's founding tragedy. In 399 BCE, when Plato was about 28 years old, Athens committed what he considered an unforgivable crime. It executed Socrates. The formal charges were corrupting the youth and impiety, but the real reasons were political. In the aftermath of Athens' devastating defeat in the Peloponnesian War and the brutal reign of the 30 tyrants, some of whom had been Socrates' students, the restored democracy viewed the philosopher with suspicion. His constant questioning of democratic values, his association with aristocratic young men, his intellectual independence, all made him dangerous in the eyes of a city trying to restore stability and confidence. Plato was present at Socrates' trial, one of those who offered to pay his fine. He was not present at the execution. He tells us in the Phaedo that he was ill, but he received detailed reports of Socrates' final hours from those who were there. The image of Socrates calmly drinking the hemlock, discussing the immortality of the soul with his friends even as the poison worked its way through his body, refusing opportunities to escape because it would mean breaking the laws he had lived under, became for Plato the defining symbol of the philosophical life. The execution of Socrates was philosophy's founding trauma. It convinced Plato that the unreformed city, whether democratic or oligarchic, could not recognize true wisdom, that public opinion was an unreliable guide to truth or justice, and that the pursuit of philosophy was not merely an intellectual exercise, but a matter of life and death. It also convinced him that he had a mission: to preserve Socrates' memory and message, to develop Socratic questioning into a complete philosophical system, and to imagine a city that would honor rather than execute its wisest citizens. The wandering years, quest for wisdom. After Socrates' death, Plato left Athens, perhaps fearing for his own safety, perhaps unable to bear the city that had killed his teacher. For the next 12 years, he traveled widely, though the exact details remain uncertain. Ancient sources tell us he visited Megara, where he studied with Euclides, one of Socrates' other students who had developed a school of philosophy emphasizing logical argument. He may have traveled to Cyrene in North Africa, where the mathematician Theodorus taught. He almost certainly visited Egypt, whose ancient civilization and stable political order impressed him deeply and influenced his later political thinking. Most significantly, Plato traveled to southern Italy and Sicily, where he encountered the Pythagorean communities. The Pythagoreans, followers of the semi-legendary mathematician and mystic Pythagoras, combined mathematical investigation with religious devotion and communal living. They believed that reality was fundamentally mathematical in nature, that the soul was immortal and underwent reincarnation, and that philosophy required not just intellectual training, but moral purification and a disciplined way of life. These ideas profoundly influenced Plato, who would incorporate Pythagorean mathematics, psychology, and mysticism into his own philosophy. In Sicily, Plato also became involved in the politics of Syracuse, the most powerful Greek city in the Western Mediterranean. He befriended Dion, the brother-in-law of Dionysius I, the tyrant of Syracuse, and apparently hoped to turn the young Dionysius II into a philosopher king, a ruler who combined political power with philosophical wisdom. This experiment ended in disaster. Plato was sold into slavery. Though quickly ransomed by friends, Dion was exiled, and Dionysius II proved entirely unsuited for philosophy. Plato would return to Syracuse twice more, each time hoping to realize his political ideals, each time failing. These failures taught him that philosophy and politics don't easily mix, yet they never extinguished his belief that they should. The Academy, creating the university, around 387 BCE, Plato returned to Athens and founded the Academy in a grove sacred to the hero Academus on the outskirts of the city. This institution would operate continuously for over 900 years until Roman Emperor Justinian closed it in 529 CE, making it one of the longest-lived educational institutions in human history. In founding the Academy, Plato created the prototype of a university, an institution dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, where students and teachers together investigated fundamental questions about reality, knowledge, ethics, and politics. The Academy was not just a school, but a community. Students, and they were exclusively male, with rare exceptions like Axel Theophilus, who reportedly dressed as a man to attend, lived and studied together, engaging in intensive mathematical training, astronomical observation, and philosophical dialogue. Above the entrance, legend tells us, was inscribed, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter." Mathematics was central to the Academy's curriculum because Plato believed it trained the mind to think about eternal, unchanging truths rather than the shifting, unreliable world of sensory experience. The Academy attracted brilliant minds from across the Greek world. Eudoxus of Cnidus, one of the greatest mathematicians of antiquity, studied and taught there, Theaetetus, whose work on irrational numbers and regular solids was incorporated into Euclid's Elements, was associated with the Academy. Most famously, Aristotle arrived at age 17 and remained for 20 years, first as a student and then as a teacher, before founding his own school, the Lyceum. For the remaining 40 years of his life, Plato divided his time between teaching at the Academy and writing. Unlike Socrates, who wrote nothing, Plato was one of antiquity's most prolific and brilliant writers. His philosophical dialogues, dramatic conversations usually featuring Socrates as the main character, combine philosophical rigor with literary artistry in a way never achieved before or since. Reading Plato, we don't just learn philosophical arguments. We witness the drama of mind and dialogue, the difficulty of pursuing truth, the personality quirks and social dynamics that shape philosophical conversation. The theory of forms, Plato's revolutionary vision. At the heart of Plato's philosophy lies one of the most influential and controversial ideas in Western thought, the theory of forms. This theory represents Plato's answer to fundamental questions that had occupied earlier Greek philosophers. What is reality? What is knowledge? How can there be permanent truth in a world of constant change? Plato observed that the physical world we perceive through our senses is constantly changing. Rivers flow, bodies age, empires rise and fall. Everything in the material world is subject to generation and corruption, coming into being and passing away. Yet we speak meaningfully of things like justice, beauty, equality, and triangularity. What are these things? They can't be identified with any particular just act, beautiful object, equal pair, or triangular figure, because all such particular instances are imperfect and temporary. Real justice doesn't change from moment to moment or place to place. The properties of triangles, that their angles sum to 180 degrees, are eternally true, not dependent on whether any physical triangles exist. Plato concluded that there must be two realms of reality. The physical world we perceive through our senses is the realm of becoming, constantly changing, imperfect, and ultimately unreal. Beyond and above this lies the realm of being, the realm of the forms or ideas, eidos. The forms are perfect, eternal, unchanging essences. There's a form of justice itself, beauty itself, equality itself, triangle itself. Everything in the physical world is merely an imperfect copy or reflection of these eternal forms. Consider a circle. No physical circle is perfectly round. Draw one with a compass, examine it under a microscope, and you'll find imperfections. Yet mathematicians prove theorems about perfect circles. What are they studying? Not physical objects, but the form of circle, an eternal, perfect entity that exists independently of whether anyone thinks about it or draws approximations of it. Physical circles participate in or imitate the form of circle but never fully instantiate it. This theory explained how knowledge is possible in a changing world. We can have knowledge only of what is stable and unchanging. We can have opinions about the physical world, but genuine knowledge, episteme, is knowledge of the forms. When we recognize that two sticks are approximately equal in length, we're comparing them to a form of equality itself, which our souls knew before birth and dimly remember. Learning, then, is really recollection, anamnesis, remembering what our mortal souls knew before becoming embodied. The Allegory of the Cave, philosophy's most famous story. Plato's most vivid and influential presentation of his philosophy appears in Book 7 of the Republic, in the Allegory of the Cave. This powerful image has shaped Western thought's understanding of education, enlightenment, and a philosopher's relationship to society. Imagine prisoners chained in a cave since childhood, facing a wall. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners, having never seen anything else, believe these shadows are reality. They develop expertise in predicting which shadows will appear, earn prestige for their predictive abilities, and live their entire lives in this state of illusion. Now imagine one prisoner is freed and forced to turn around. The fire's light hurts his eyes. He's confused, disoriented. The shadows he thought were real turn out to be cast by objects he never knew existed. Dragged up the cave's rough ascent and out into sunlight, he's overwhelmed, unable to see anything. Gradually, his eyes adjust, He sees reflections in water, then actual objects, then the stars and moon, and finally, the ultimate achievement. He looks upon the sun itself, the source of all light and life. Understanding that his former life was illusion, he feels pity for those still chained in the cave. He returns to free them, to tell them the truth. But his eyes, now accustomed to sunlight, can't see in the cave's darkness. He stumbles, appears foolish. The prisoners, comfortable in their ignorance, mock him. When he tells them their reality is mere shadows, they think him mad. If he persists in trying to free them, they might kill him. The allegory works on multiple levels. The cave represents the physical world of sensory experience and conventional opinion. The shadows are the images and beliefs most people take for reality. The journey upward represents philosophical education. Painful, disorienting, difficult. The sun represents a form of the good, the highest form, which illuminates all other forms and makes knowledge possible. The philosopher who returns to the cave is Socrates, or any philosopher who tries to enlighten others and faces ridicule, rejection, or worse. The ideal state, justice in the soul and city. Plato's Republic, his longest and most influential dialogue, ostensibly asks a simple question: what is justice? But the inquiry leads Plato to construct an ideal city-state in speech, a utopia designed according to philosophical principles. This thought experiment has influenced political philosophy ever since, both through those who admire it and those who recoil from its authoritarian implications. Plato argues that justice in the individual's soul mirrors justice in the state. Both soul and state have three parts. The state is producers, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, guardians or warriors, and rulers. The soul has appetitive, spirited, and rational parts. Justice means each part performing its proper function without interfering with the others. Producers should produce, warriors should protect, rulers should rule. Similarly, appetite should be controlled, spirit should support reason, and reason should govern. Who should rule? Plato's answer is shocking and has shocked readers for 2,400 years. Philosopher kings, only those who have contemplated the forms, especially the form of the good, understand what is truly valuable and beneficial. Only philosophers, who love wisdom more than power or wealth, can be trusted with absolute authority. Political power and philosophical wisdom must unite in the same person. To produce philosopher kings, Plato proposes a radical educational system. Children showing aptitude would be selected and given intensive training in mathematics, music, and gymnastics. As young adults, they'd study philosophy. Those who excel would become rulers. To prevent corruption, these guardians would own no private property, have no families, children would be raised communally, and live, simply, sustained by the producing class. They'd rule not for personal benefit, but because it's their duty, their function in the just city. The Republic has troubled readers continuously. Plato advocates censoring poetry that presents gods or heroes behaving badly, since such stories corrupt character. He proposes a noble lie, a myth that citizens are born with gold, silver, or bronze in their souls, determining their proper class to maintain social stability. He describes what we now call totalitarianism. The state controls education, art, reproduction, and property. Individual freedom is subordinated to the collective good. Yet Plato's vision also contains profound insights. He recognizes that politics is fundamentally about values. What we consider good shapes what laws we make and what society we create. He sees that power corrupts unless rulers are educated to value wisdom over pleasure. He understands that a good society requires citizens of good character, making education central politics. And he insists, against the cynicism of his age and ours, that there are objective standards of justice and goodness, not merely subjective preferences or power struggles. Later dialogues, refinement and revision. Plato's thought evolved over his long writing career, spanning perhaps 50 years. Scholars divide his dialogues into early, middle, and late periods, each showing different concerns and philosophical positions. The early dialogues, probably written shortly after Socrates' death, feature Socrates questioning others about virtue, piety, courage, and friendship. These typically end in aporia, puzzlement, with no definitive answer reached. They showcase the Socratic method and preserve, perhaps, something of the historical Socrates' approach. The middle dialogues, including the Republic, Symposium, and Phaedo, present Plato's mature philosophy, the theory of forms, the immortality of the soul, and the vision of the ideal state. Here Socrates becomes more of a mouthpiece for Plato's own views, rather than a historical figure who claimed to know nothing. The late dialogues show Plato grappling with problems in his own theories. The Parmenides presents devastating criticisms of the theory of forms, arguments so powerful that scholars debate whether Plato abandoned the theory. How can the forms be separate from physical things, yet explain those things? How can one form be present in many particular instances? These dialogues show a philosopher willing to subject his own ideas to rigorous criticism. The Timaeus presents Plato's cosmology, a creation myth where a divine craftsman, the demiurge, creates a physical world by imposing mathematical order on pre-existing chaos, using eternal forms as templates. The Laws, Plato's longest dialogue, present a more realistic political vision than the Republic, acknowledging human imperfection, and proposing a detailed legal code for an actual city. These works influenced cosmology, theology, and political thought for centuries. The Symposium, Love and Ascent to Beauty. Among Plato's most beautiful and influential dialogues is the Symposium, a discussion of love, eros, presented through a series of speeches at a dinner party. Each guest offers a different perspective on love's nature and value, culminating in Socrates' account of love as told him by the priestess Diotima. According to Diotima, love is not a god but a spirit, an intermediary between gods and humans. Love is desire for beauty, but this desire can be educated and refined. Initially, we love beautiful bodies. Properly guided, we come to love beautiful souls more than bodies, then love beautiful laws and institutions, then love beautiful knowledge, and finally, the ultimate achievement, we behold beauty itself, the form of beauty, eternal and perfect. This ladder of love, from physical attraction to philosophical contemplation of the beautiful itself, became enormously influential. It provided a philosophical justification for same-sex love, common in ancient Greece, as potentially a path to wisdom. It suggested that erotic desire, properly channeled, could drive philosophical education, and it presented a vision of human fulfillment as transcending physical pleasure in favor of intellectual contemplation. The Symposium also contains one of literature's most memorable character portraits, Alcibiades' drunken speech praising Socrates. Alcibiades, the brilliant, beautiful, dissolute Athenian general, describes his failed attempt to seduce Socrates, who resisted his beauty in favor of philosophical conversation. This portrait captures Socrates' unique combination of physical courage, intellectual brilliance, moral integrity, and erotic magnetism that made him irresistible to young men like Plato and Alcibiades, even or especially when he rejected their advances. Plato's legacy, the footnotes to Plato. The 20th century philosopher Alfred North Whitehead famously remarked that the European philosophical tradition consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. While perhaps an exaggeration, this observation captures an important truth. Plato established the central questions, concepts, and methods that have occupied Western philosophy ever since. Is reality fundamentally material or ideal? Do universal concepts exist independently or only in particular instances? Can we have certain knowledge or only probable opinion? What is justice? What is the good life? How should we organize society? What is the relationship between philosophy and politics? Plato didn't just ask these questions. He developed sophisticated frameworks for thinking about them that remain influential. His theory of forms influenced medieval Christian theology through Augustine and later Aquinas. The idea of an eternal, perfect, immaterial realm beyond the physical world resonated with Christian concept of heaven and God's eternal nature. Neoplatonism, a later development of Plato's philosophy by Plotinus and others, shaped Christian mysticism and theology for centuries. During the Renaissance, Plato's works were rediscovered and translated into Latin by Marsilio Ficino, inspiring a revival of interest in ancient philosophy. The Platonic Academy of Florence became a center of humanist learning. Plato's ideas influenced art, literature, and political thought throughout the Renaissance and Enlightenment. Modern philosophy has been both inspired by and defined against Plato. Rationalists like Descartes and Leibniz followed Plato in believing reason could discover eternal truths independent of sensory experience. Empiricists like Locke and Hume rejected Plato's forms, insisting all knowledge derives from experience. Idealists like Hegel developed elaborate systems reminiscent of Plato's metaphysics. Analytical philosophers studied Plato's dialogues as models of conceptual analysis. In political philosophy, Plato's Republic has been both praised as a vision of justice and condemned as a blueprint for totalitarianism. Karl Popper, in The Open Society and Its Enemies, famously attacked Plato as an enemy of liberal democracy and individual freedom. Others see in Plato a serious attempt to ground politics in objective values rather than power or subjective preference, an attempt we still need even if we reject his specific proposals. The Eternal Dialogue. Plato died around 348 BCE, at approximately 80 years old, having spent 4 decades running the academy and writing dialogues that would influence human thought for millennia. According to legend, he died at a wedding feast, pen in hand, still writing, still refining his ideas. Whether true or not, the story captures something essential about Plato: his restless pursuit of wisdom, his belief that philosophy is not a doctrine to be accepted, but an activity to be practiced, a dialogue to be continued. What made Plato's influence so enduring? Partly, it was his literary genius. He wrote philosophy as drama, creating dialogue so vivid and compelling that readers across 24 centuries feel they're present at the conversations, watching Socrates question, watching interlocutors puzzle through difficulties, experiencing the drama of philosophical inquiry. His prose combines logical rigor with poetic beauty, philosophical precision with mythic power. Partly, it was the comprehensiveness of his vision. Plato addressed not just isolated philosophical problems, but the fundamental questions of metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, aesthetics, and psychology. He showed how these questions connect, how answers in one area constrain answers in another, how philosophy must be systematic to be adequate. Partly it was his method. Plato taught philosophy not as a set of doctrines to be memorized, but as a practice of questioning, examining, and refining ideas through dialogue. The Socratic method, asking for definitions, testing them against examples, revealing contradictions, and beginning again, remains philosophy's central method. Plato understood that philosophy isn't about having answers, but about pursuing wisdom, about recognizing and examining our ignorance. Most fundamentally, Plato articulated questions that remain central to human self-understanding. How should we live? What is real? What can we know? How should we organize society? These aren't questions we've answered and moved beyond. They're questions each generation must address anew. Questions that define what it means to be human and to seek understanding. In an age of relativism, Plato insists there are objective truths about goodness and justice. In an age of materialism, he argues that immaterial realities, concepts, values, meanings, are more real than physical objects. In an age of specialization, he reminds us that wisdom requires understanding how everything connects. In an age of short-term thinking, he directs our attention to eternal truths. We need not accept Plato's specific answers, his theory of forms, his ideal state, his authoritarian politics, to benefit from his questions and methods. Indeed, Plato himself, particularly in the late dialogues, subjected his own theories to withering criticism. He understood that philosophy is an ongoing conversation, not a finished system. When we engage with Plato's dialogues today, we join a conversation that has continued for over 2 millennia, a conversation about the most fundamental questions of human existence. We become participants in a dialogue that, in a very real sense, created Western philosophy. In this sense, Plato never died. He continues speaking in his dialogues, questioning, examining, inviting us to pursue wisdom alongside him. The Academy may have closed in 529 CE, but the philosophical conversation Plato initiated continues wherever people seriously examine their beliefs and pursue truth. That is Plato's true immortality. Not as a set of doctrines, but as an eternal dialogue partner, forever challenging us to think more clearly, live more justly, and seek wisdom more earnestly.